At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome, everyone, to American Girls, the podcast. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girls series book by book, except on Patreon, where we're doing kind of whatever we want that we think lives within the world of this show. I'm Mary.
I'm still Allison.
And Allison, wow, you've brought us here today to talk about a real gem.
Yes. You've heard of Upstairs, Downstairs. You may have been told there's nothing upstairs. This is a book called Something Upstairs by the famous one-note name, but not one-hit wonder, Avi.
Wow. I almost don't have words for what this book did to me.
Thank you.
I've never read this book before. I grew up reading other books by Avi, of course. It's hard to escape Avi if you grew up in the 90s, I guess, or early aughts. Like, he's so prolific. But somehow this book just passed me right on by, and now it's, with me forever.
So I learned in preparing for this episode that Avi is not a native Rhode Islander, contrary to what I was told. I assumed that Avi was and is a lifelong resident of Rhode Island. Turns out that Avi briefly lived in Rhode Island, which is a mistake one should commit, but regardless. Wow. I read this book, I should say specifically, as a chapter book, and I remember that vividly. And I still have my copy of True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle. As I've said to quite a few people who messaged us, I am not brave enough right now to revisit that book in case it's bad.
I think that's fair. That's kind of been my reticence too. I know a lot of people have written on the Discord that they hoped we would take that on, and I think it's just kind of like, if you really were into something, there is a certain level of fear that it's not only will it not live up to your love, but it might actively be offensive at this time.
Yes.
So I
am willing to do that. Like, we've gone hard for Molly. We've revisited a lot of different things. I'm not saying I will never read it. I'm saying after the devastation of reading the Nancy Drew and the eugenics mystery, I just need a little bit more time.
I can't unpack that. It's like too much for me.
Should we just say at the top, sometimes we save this for the end. I'm really excited with what we're doing to close out this quarter of 2021. We decided to read Something Upstairs for October of this year. Can I tell them our next two books?
Yeah, do it.
So we decided to read Cultish for November, which we're super excited about. Contemporary, brand new book. And then for December, we are going to read Anderson Cooper's History of His Own Family, Vanderbilt.
Oh my God. I can't wait.
If you think I'm insufferable about Avi,
wait for Vanderbilt time.
Wait for Vanderbilt time. I'm hoping that Cultish will teach me how to rein in some of my proclivities with this kind of stuff. But reading this book was such a pleasure because I got so much out of it. And I just so remember having to read this as a chapter book in school and having to wait chapter by chapter. And I thought I had almost dreamed this into being. There were guides written for Rhode Island students on how to read this book chapter by chapter. There were walking tours. We Rhode Islanders really took this book on. Whether we should have or not, I'm not sure, but it really surpassed my memories and expectations.
I don't know if I'm at where you're at with this book, but I don't know if it's possible for anyone to be where you're at with this book.
That's fair.
I feel like what's probably influencing our reading differently is you read this as a child and you had a very treasured experience with this book as you're describing, which I can totally relate to for books that were meaningful for me. But I read this at, the tender age of 35 and in the year 2021. So I'm sure that made it probably a different experience. So I think it'll be fun to kind of imagine how it's, influencing us differently or how we're seeing this book a little bit differently. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, this book is just a wee bit younger than both of us. It was first published in 1988. And we'll have to talk about this, but I have a very recent 2010 Scholastic reprint, and they changed some things, which is kind of interesting. But
I have an original. Thank you.
You have the creepy cover.
I have this from the Putnam. I had an ILL list, which is sad. My local library didn't have it, but I have a first edition.
Wow.
Not to brag.
First edition Avi. So I'll give us the synopsis for those of you who unfortunately have not been able to enjoy the wonderful works of Edward Irving Wartis, which is the actual name behind Avi. So after Kenny Holdorf's family moves from LA to Providence, Rhode Island into a 1789 row house, Kenny meets the ghost of Caleb, a 16-year-old enslaved boy who is haunting the house. According to records from the period, Caleb killed himself in the little attic in Kenny's house. But Caleb says otherwise and asks Kenny to return with him to the early 19th century and prevent his murder by slave traders. Kenny's involvement in the centuries-old mystery could leave him trapped in the past forever. How is this for kids?
I truly can't answer that question. I'm not even sure it's for me.
I would like you, just as an exercise, to pick the first 5 words that come to mind when I read that synopsis and ask you to think about something upstairs.
How, what, why, white people stuff. There's a lot that runs through my head. What are your first 5 words?
I'm going to say panic, keychain. That will become clear soon.
Sure.
Bad librarian. I'm only counting that as 1. Murder mystery. White supremacy. Did I already say that?
I don't think you said that one, but I
chose clusters.
Yes.
If I got away with keychain. I loved this book upon reread because I think it's a beautiful metaphor for the way that white people have chosen to not reckon with slavery in the Northeast and particularly Rhode Island. And I think that this book is brilliant in some ways that are intentional. And I think upon reread 20 plus years later, for me, it's brilliant in this whole other satirical way that is not intended.
So say more about that.
We are always that TikTok where it's expand on that. No, I won't. No. Oh, I will. So there's a line early on in this book where we are led to understand that Kenny has moved into this house on Sheldon Street, which I will be going over the Redfin listing very soon. But
into it.
So Kenny moves from LA to Providence and he's in culture shock and he's in a historic house. And one of the first things he encounters is this book of all the previous residents. Fun Avi fact, this is actually the house that Avi lived in during his too short tenure in Rhode Island. One of the first things that, if you could see Mary's eyebrows thus far in the recording, they tell a story. So Kenny has this interaction with Caleb, who is an enslaved boy who, through the course of how he comes to pass, is trapped forever in this house. And we're led to believe over the course of the book that Caleb's death has been shrouded in mystery and there have been lies about it. And he was, in fact, murdered. Kenny is asked by Caleb to essentially avenge him and to rewrite history and to save him, right? To go back in time, which Kenny is able to do with his Dodgers keychain and to save him. And there are so many really poignant moments where Caleb essentially says to Kenny, I've been betrayed so many times before. I have no reason to trust you. And one of the most profound moments in the book is there's this line about how there is something upstairs. And I think one of the really interesting plays on the words is the something, of course, is Caleb, right? It's Caleb who is keeping Kenny up at night. But this notion that Caleb is a thing and not a person, the fact that he's a ghost also kind of stands in. And there's these really great lines about how America has this thing upstairs. The parents are not willing to engage it. Other adults are not really able to help Kenny. And even he is actually not really willing or able to confront the horror that lives upstairs.
I think that's very true. All of that is true. And it also leads me to wonder what was going on in the 1980s and early 1990s when a lot of children's authors were we're going to engage time travel as a central plot mechanism to send kids back into the past. We've talked in the past about the Holocaust novels that send American teens in the 80s back to the Holocaust to die in gas chambers. And then, like, once they die, wake up again and they understand their privilege or, like, their sense of history, and how, like, kind of crazy some of that was. And I think this is sort of like a complement or a supplement to those books of a similar era, but, like, through the lens of race. Like, it actually frames time travel itself as white privilege, because you don't have a book where, like, obviously, like, a black boy his age being sent back in that time would be a very different context than him. Like, he never feels himself personally in danger, like, not really, because he's, like, he can pass in any time. And even, like, the evil librarian, who is actually, like, a slave trader, he also can jump around in time. So it's like, what's going on with that?
So I'm laughing at the invocation of the evil librarian, because he is sort of, like, comically evil, and part of how he deploys that on Kenny is he, like, tricks him in the course of his research. There are all of these moments, though, where Kenny is interacting with Caleb, and in this really subtle way, Kenny doesn't understand what he's looking at, right? Like, the first time that Caleb materializes, we don't immediately understand that he is black. We just understand that he is something between human and not human, right? There's this really interesting moment where he kind of, like, morphs up from this ether. And if you have the cover that shows the hands pushing aside the box, there's essentially a blood stain, and Caleb almost materializes. And Kenny doesn't acknowledge that Caleb is a person or has any personhood until they touch flesh on flesh. And to me, it's like there are so many moments that, upon reading it in 2021, it's a metaphor. Like, he literally can't recognize that this person is a person. And the first word that Caleb tries to get out, and Kenny is like, "What? Speak up, say it again," is slave. Mm-hmm. And the first conversation that they have is Kenny questioning Caleb, "What are you? Who are you?" And we also learn that Caleb is a teenager and Kenny is a bit younger than he is, right? He's kind of just going into high school. And there's this really weird dynamic where Caleb calls Kenny out and says, you know, all of these young boys, all of these people who've said that they would rescue me, that they would change things for me, they never do it. And instead of making Kenny this kind of hero, Kenny, it has all of these inner monologues that he doesn't want to do it. Like, he doesn't want to be brave. He doesn't actually want to do anything hard. And Pardon Tillinghast is both, like, enabling him to understand the story behind Caleb and tricking him and sending him on these different things. When presented with an opportunity to change the course of history for Caleb, Kenny is basically like, "Will I get to keep my keychain?" Like, that's literally part of it for Ken.
Yeah, and it's interesting because his interactions with Caleb are so, like, in a way, like, you can see them as, like, a mirror to, like, white-black interactions of a certain kind in the 80s and 90s and now, which is, like, I don't really want to I don't want to lose any of my privilege to give you, like, basic humanity, but I also don't want you to be mad at me because I don't want to do that. Like, there's a lot of moments where, like, he's like, like, I don't know. Like, he's saying I couldn't go back to my time. Like, if I don't kill you, I can't go home. So, like, that's hard for me. And Caleb's like, but maybe you could not murder me. And he's like, no, I don't know about that. And it's just like, it feels like very, like, current in some ways, in sad ways for him not to. But he's also like, but I don't want you to be mad. Like, I do want to help you, but not at my own expense. Please.
No, and Kenny is actually based on a real kid that Avi met. And the opening scene is kind of Avi writing that he's visiting a school, and this boy named Kenny says that he has to tell him a story. He has to tell him something, like, really, really amazing. And that is all based on a real story, except instead of telling him this hair-raising historical thriller, when the boy actually gets to speak to Avi alone, in reality, they get in this, like, one-on-one, and the boy says, "I just wanted to say hello. That was it." But Avi kind of took this as a launching point of, like, imagining a child pulling him aside. And that is the launching point for the novel and for Kenny telling this unbelievable story about Pardon Tillinghast and rewriting history. I think what I found really resonant about it is it doesn't imagine a white boy from LA living in Providence, and also thinking about what's to come in LA, right, in the next few years, like tremendous unrest and violence committed against different communities, particularly by the police. You don't see Kenny kind of coming in and saying, like, hey, everyone, I have a cool West Coast attitude. I'm not stuck in my ways. Kenny is like panicking about the keychain. He's upset that he has to go to a boring baseball game. He doesn't want to go to the swim club. He has all of these like extremely mundane middle and upper class problems. And the way that he interacts with Caleb for much of the book is that Caleb is bothering him. Like there is Caleb, like Caleb is a nuisance. Caleb is interrupting. And I think it was interesting that to the truly like last page, Kenny is not a savior. Like Kenny could not be further away from that trope because Kenny actually doesn't really want to do the right thing.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't. But what's also kind of interesting about the ending is like, it's not like Kenny leaves this book by somehow finding a resolution that absolves him of having to murder anybody. It's like he just chooses not to kill Caleb. He chooses the evil librarian instead. Presumably, correct. I think we're led to believe like he shoots him and then he wakes up in his bed in the present, right?
Yes.
So yes. It's not like this is a child who's like, okay, like I found a way through this without having to hurt anyone. It's like, oh, I just had to murder like a different person.
So part of what Kenny learns when he goes back in time repeatedly, because he is able to do that kind of through the magic, so to speak, of what Caleb brings into his life, he's able to go back and he's able to see that Parting Tillinghast has not only been responsible for the murder of Caleb, he's also caused all of these rumors that Caleb is going to lead a slave insurrection. That's like pretty critical to the story. And it's when he goes back a certain time that Kenny recognizes Parting Tillinghast, not just for like the weird librarian at his local archive, but as this actual sort of like bad actor from the past. And that kind of heightens things for him because it's Pardon who says, if you change history, you're trapped here. Like if you change history, you actually can't go back to your 1988 life in Providence. You are stuck here with all of us. And it's interesting that I think they chose to paint Providence not as an abolitionist city, because it absolutely wasn't in that time period, but to show that essentially like wealthy white elites were misbehaving and scapegoating a 16-year-old Black enslaved boy. And it's late, right? Like for this time period, like you may not imagine that there were still enslaved people in the 1780s in Providence. There were. And that Caleb is kind of situated as the scapegoat for this crisis.
Yeah, and what something I appreciated about the book is that when he goes back in time, you really get a sense of the city. Like I think Avi does a really good job of describing like how he travels around the city, and he kind of has a sense of wayfinding that's sort of amazing. Like as someone who with no directional sense, I appreciated that about him in the present and when he's in the past. Partly because he's a latchkey kid, so he's spending a lot of time alone. His parents are working, whatever. But you get a sense as he's walking in 1789 that like he goes to the area of Providence where enslaved people live or free Black people live. And you get a sense of like the segregation. And it did lead me to wonder, like I know there have been walking tours of Providence that are like themed on this book. Do they cover like segregation now in like the geography of Providence?
So I think if you were to drill down into like the exact time that this book is situated in, I think you would actually find that it's not as sharply segregated as it will be in a decade. And part of that is in the 1780s, you can still find on census records, a lot of the enslaved people living in Providence are living in very prominent households. And they're living in households with pretty large estates still, similar to the house that this book is set in on Sheldon Street. You would have people with these like pretty big homes. A good example of this is the John Brown house, which has a pretty massive landscape around it. And there are enslaved people living not far from each other, but I think part of why they chose to make a plot at the center of this is they are actually very alienated from each other because they are not allowed to congregate. They are not allowed to meet with Indigenous people in public. And so part of why Caleb becomes kind of this source of imagined fear among people like Tillinghast is this sense that if Black people are allowed to gather together, they will start a plot, right? And they will try to take over the city. They're both segregated in the sense of like free Black people are given very few opportunities, but they're also often warned out in this period from the places that they had been living. So as free Black people are undergoing that process of manumission, like as they're gradually being freed, a lot of them are not allowed to stay where they had been living. So let's say if you live or work for an elite in that time period, and then you're part of that gradual manumission process and you have to be freed, a lot of people were essentially compelled to leave the community they had lived in their whole lives.
Wow. That's like impossible to even fathom now. But yeah, oh wow. I'm kind of
I never got to go on that walking tour, so I can't say what they talked
But you're
about.
not, the good thing is you're not bitter about it.
I'm not bitter. I am upset.
It hasn't harmed you. When did they stop this walking tour? Do you know?
So I don't know if it has been put on pause for COVID or if this is just not as big of a part of education as it used to be. But I do know that there are a good number of groups that do like a really good job of talking about the different places where there were sources of community for free Black people in Providence and talking about the different places where people were enslaved. But I don't think that it's done on the scale of bigger cities. Like I think part of why this book took me by surprise is it is so candid and forthright about the fact that there is this boy, right, who literally haunts this house, right? Like he is a haunting presence and a reminder of slavery. And the first conversations that Kenny has with Caleb, it's kind of presented, I think, in a very sharp 1980s perspective, which is Caleb bums him out, right? Like we're given this very privileged perspective where learning his story is not this kind of like call to action. It just kind of puts him in a bad mood and he doesn't know what to do about it. And I think that's such a telling, intentional or not, insight into kind of like the white American psyche in 1988. Like, don't talk to me about this, right?
Yes, and like it's all about like solving the immediate annoyance and not really lingering with like the bigger issue that might actually require greater work from you. And in a way, it's like this book kind of reminded me of E.T., which,
yes,
you know, because like that, like something that struck me as a conduit is that, you know, the main lead in that book is kind of dealing with the trauma of his family's divorce, and he doesn't really want to deal with it and like the crisis in the American family in a bigger way. So he's like, you literally think about this movie, it's like he has an alien in his closet that he's hiding. And basically like his immediate concern is like, oh my God, I can't let my mom know I have an alien living in my closet. I have to help him get home. That's it. It's not like, oh my God, what does it mean that there are aliens that exist? What does it mean that, like, this is happening? Like, he has so distilled the problem down to, like, okay, I just have to get rid of this, and then it's over. Like, it has nothing to do with me. Like, I'm otherwise completely fine. And in a similar way, like, Caleb stands in for E.T., and rather than, like, the crisis in the family, it's, like, our national crisis on race, which we don't really want to address.
They have so many conversations that go like this. For example, Kenny is kind of interrogating Caleb and he's like, wait, like, we got to back up. Do you know why you were killed? And Caleb explains over and over, essentially, like, it was the situation of my bondage and my powerlessness relative to these people that got me killed. But he says it like in a far more direct way. And Kenny's like, not really getting it. And they have this conversation over and over. And then finally Kenny says, well, can I help you in some way? And Caleb swings around and Caleb is like, basically, have you been listening? And then Kenny keeps pushing. Great, just tell me how. And the ghost stares and he's just like, help me. Like, he just keeps telling him, he's like, you need to help me. And Kenny's like, you are going to need to spell it out for me exactly. The conversation like clearly is not going well, and there's the ghost equivalent of slamming a door, and Kenny says, Caleb, can I ask you some other stuff? Like, he cannot read the room at all. The ghost paused only long enough to say, leave me. Kenny, not sure how he'd offended the ghost, waited in the hopes that he would say more. And this was kind of reminding me of a lot of conversations last year, which was people putting out the fact that sometimes you need to start to do your own work before you start asking activists or people in a different position from yours to explain how you can go about amplifying what they are trying to do, and how you could be an ally or accomplice with them. Basically, they have conversation after conversation where Caleb explains that he's trapped as this kind of memory and haunting. And Kenny is like, I do have a ball game. Like, I don't
He's like,
know.
ooh, would love to help you. Do have to go to the Paw Sox with my dad. So
The Paw Sox were a longtime fixture of nearby Pawtucket, Rhode Island. They are also no more.
there are no more? Wait, what?
They are no more. They are no more. Rhode Island disclaimer, they are no longer. This is going to be a
Since
controversial
when?
statement.
Wait, what?
That affiliate team now plays at Polar Park in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah, I did know that. That's difficult. I'm torn. I'll just be candid with you because you know what polar means to me. So it's like
I do. Have they ever sponsored
hard.
this show?
Not yet, but it's like I'm holding out
gonna
hope. I have a can of Polar right next to me. It's like, this could happen, Allison. Like, I believe in it. Like, Dunkin' and Polar, please.
I think that's as likely as us acquiring 15 Sheldon Street. I went on every real estate website I could today to get an insider's view of this home. Like, I was ready to hit I'm the owner to get a real estate report. That is the place where this book is situated. Your face is one of shock. You can actually see the attic on Redfin, of which Kenny and Caleb speak and reside.
Send it to me. Do you have the link?
Do I? Are you Mary?
I need to see this right
Mary,
now.
I'm going to tell you what I did today.
I'm scared.
Do I have the link? Do I have the link?
Okay, thank you.
I have the link, but more importantly, there is a listing, a roster, if you will, in this book of the previous imagined residents of 15 Sheldon Street. Do you think for a second that I didn't pull out actual maps and actual preservation records to see if it was true?
Ooh, I was hoping that you would take things in that direction. What did you learn?
So here's something interesting. The first supposed owner of the land on which this home was built, according to Avi, is Roger Williams and his family. It's not Roger Williams. However, pulled out some maps, pulled out some historic records. His brother, Roger Williams, owned a farm. Not Roger, a different Williams. Sorry, not Roger Williams. I wrote his name down. Actually owned a farm on the spot where this home was built, the Daniel Stillwell house. Let me pull up my records.
I can't believe this house is estimated at $979,000. It last sold for $571 in 2014. My God.
I took some notes. It's mostly surrounded by houses that are actually worth far more. This just isn't that big of a house. So the first supposed owner of this plot of land was the Williams family. Nice try. 1636 to 1743. Not true. That area was actually briefly owned by Robert Williams, not Roger Williams, who arrived after 1636 and not long thereafter relocated. Yes, I did ask an expert to help me with this information.
Oh my God.
I was not, like, when I tell you, like, I was not here to play with this book. I have a packet of notes.
Tell me more. Who else lived there? Like, what else you got?
So I did actually pull up the Providence Preservation Society file for 15 Sheldon Street, and I discovered that it was actually a captain, like a sea captain, who resided at this house. It was originally part of the estate of Captain Christopher Sheldon, and then, of course, one of the namesakes is then Abraham Stillwell, Daniel Stillwell. That's the Stillwell connection of the book. And then you can go through the whole kind of file. Why is this file known to me? First of all, it was Googleable. Second of all, when I was a much younger intern, I scanned all of these housing files.
Wow. You were just that deep.
I honestly feel like, joking aside, I started talking about this book at work today and I was like, I have been preparing for this recording in some way or another for 12 years.
I respect the hell out of that. Well, it's
Thank
just,
you.
it's interesting because it's like there's this whole thing in the book about like what are ghosts actually? Like,
Yes.
are they just figments of memory? And if that's the case, as the bad librarian shows us, or actually bad archivist, not so much librarian, you know, like what we remember is controlled by what we've chosen to remember, people before us. And so, like, the bad archivist has really curated a story about Providence history that he uses to fool our lead character. But it kind of invites a conversation about, like, the politics of memory itself. And are those the real ghost stories, like what we choose to remember or not?
This is where I think this book is genuinely a brilliant book. Caleb and Kenny have an argument about what ghosts are, to your point. And so Kenny kind of gets snippy with him and says, why, or what do you keep looking for? Why can't you just walk out this door? Basically, Kenny is like, I know I just got here and I know I'm younger than you, but I do feel like I have this figured out. At first, Caleb merely glared at him, and then he starts to explain. If a person dies in an unnatural or unjust way, that person's memory stays fixed in time and space. Then we have the interjection, is that what you are? A memory? Yes, and you stay that way forever. Some memories fade, others are forgotten. The bitter ones become ghosts in search of an altered past. I just feel like that is really incredible writing.
Yes. I'm just like thinking
You are
about
not
it.
convinced.
No,
So you're,
that's
like,
not it.
troubled by the logic.
I'm troubled by the logic a little bit because then
What is Caleb?
yeah, like I mean I understand like it makes sense to kind of view him as like someone who's like frozen in time, who's like looking for a different past. Like that makes sense. But then how do we put that in conversation with like all memory? Because or like I think Avi wants to kind of like have this conversation where it's like ghosts have a relationship to memory and what we choose to remember, or like the ghosts that and the things that we would rather forget are the ghosts that haunt us. So actually, like I think the things that are haunting us are the things that we're choosing not to remember,
Yes.
not necessarily memory itself.
The only person who is haunted by Caleb is Kenny, because Kenny is the only person, like, basically, if you haven't read this book, like, there are all sorts of problems. Like, there are bloodstains in this house, and mom and dad who've, like, relocated to be, like, this family on a brand new coast seem completely oblivious. They're not hearing the boxes being moved around. Like, there is a sense that all of these supernatural things are only happening to Kenny. We hear that it takes an hour for the book carton to be pushed away by the like paranormal hands that end up belonging to Caleb. No one else hears it but Kenny. Only he is actually haunted by this.
Yeah, I think there's just something weird. There's like some weird moments in the book for me where it kind of reminds me of like there was this skit, like Ben Stiller had a show on MTV like a million years ago. And I just saw it in reruns. I was like too young to see it when it was actually on for real. But Janine Garofalo was on it and she did this skit where like she went back in time and it was like the worst person to go back in time because she had no knowledge of history. She would go back to the Civil War and they'd be like, who's going to win this battle? And she'd be like, oh my God, like, I'm sorry. Like, I spaced, like, I have no idea, like, totally not my thing. Like, history is just not my jam. And they'd be like, oh my God, like, people in the past would be like, it would just really help if you could kind of tell us something about this. And she was like, woo, wish I could help you. No can do.
Coming this fall, meet a new kind of time traveler. She's just an ordinary citizen like you and me.
Then if what you say is true, and you have indeed traversed time, you'll know every strategy and battle of the conflict to come. The revolution is won!
Well, sir, actually, all I remember is redcoats, Minutemen, and you have wooden teeth.
Well, tell me something I don't know. Didn't you study American history?
Yeah, but I wasn't a freak about it.
And I just kept thinking of Kenny, like of that skit, like thinking about every time Kenny would go back in the past. Like he would see things happening in Rhode Island history literally in front of him. And he'd be like, no idea what's going on with this. But then there was a moment in the book when a group of like air quotes sailors have been paid by the slave traders to stir up trouble in the black section of town to create like a rumored slave insurrection. And a sailor uses the N-word to describe Caleb. And Kenny's there and hears it. And he has absolutely no response to hearing that word. And that's what I found really troubling about this book is like, for Kenny being from 1988, you would hope that in that moment, he's at least like, we hear a report of like he flinched or he was startled or he was like in shock. And instead it's like, that just like passes him by. And I think that that's kind of an uncomfortable moment for me because it's like, because it's not acknowledged, it does fit with the superstructure narrative of like, well, if it doesn't affect Kenny, he's not like, it doesn't land on him, so he's like not taking it on. And he in fact like is annoyed that he has to take any of this on. But to hear that word and like seem untroubled by it, like it kind of just like gave me pause for a second in the book.
I know I own this book somewhere, but I couldn't find it, so I had to get it again. And I have like a pretty new version. There's a puzzling moment where they reference the fact that Kenny lives in the 21st century. And yet, like, everything else he does at the library screams 1980s.
Oh my God, that's so weird.
I do think they made some textual changes. I think it's that tension, right? Like, he is actually a pretty realistic representation of the way I think an average or even privileged white person who seems to have no interest in social justice, like when he goes back, he does hear rumblings of people who are suggesting, on the one hand, colonization and repatriation, or kind of these attacks on local free people or enslaved people. And what's kind of bizarre about Kenny as a character is he's not like particularly moved by either, right? Like Kenny really only has panic for himself. And like, joking aside, the keychain serves as a talisman and an anchor in what time he's in. And when Tillinghast threatens to steal it and to take away his ability to move across time, that is the first time that Kenny is actually really moved to emotion. So Kenny is kind of like an empty vessel in some ways for asking these questions about race, but Caleb actually gets to express real frustration with that, right? Like Caleb is irritated that Kenny is not willing to be his ally or is not willing to step up. And I think it presents like Caleb has issues with a lot of people for a variety of reasons, but it's like he has issues with parting Tillinghast because he wants to kill him. And he has issues with Kenny because Kenny is perfectly fine with him being killed. And it's like, is that not American history in a nutshell?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Like the use of that word is absolutely troubling. I don't remember if there was even a conversation about that when I read this book as a younger person. I genuinely don't, which is probably also pretty telling. But I also know that having read this as a younger person, I wonder how much of it was presented to me as just fiction and how much I was willing to or able to internalize that the very real aspects of slavery and the slave trade talked about in this book, just dismiss them as fiction because a teacher told me all of it wasn't real.
Yeah, I wonder. It does make you like kind of try to remember how we were taught any of this stuff in that time. You know, like I remember being at a house museum for a field trip and being like randomly in a class of all white students selected with another student to be, quote, slaves for the tea party we were about to have, as if like that was like a caste system of racialized slavery was just like a role that a white person could put on for an hour and take off. It's like insane for me to think back on that time in my life, like that moment as an adult now. But I think it's also telling too that like the keychain he has is for the Dodgers, because in a way it's like he's a Dodger, like he's going back and forth, like he's dodging any responsibility when he can. But also time travel doesn't necessarily function to help him like learn something. No. It's like it's easier to solve. In some ways, it's like he's just using it to kind of escape whatever the immediate trouble is that he's in and just like resolve it for himself so that he has no like challenge in his life.
But I think as a kind of astute social commentary, when we used to teach in a classroom, or I should say you still teach in a classroom, but I do not, I think a lot of students or a lot of people especially might imagine that if they lived in another time, they would be abolitionists, right? Or they would intuitively be fighting against something that is now generally regarded as wrong, I don't want to say universally regarded because of the world that we live in, right? Like, unfortunately, that is not true. And I think about a book like this and how kind of curious and how much a reflection of the period it's in, that the primary purpose of this journey back in time is not to actually change much of anything in Kenny's heart. Like, if anything, it just kind of unsettles him, and it becomes this weird story that he tells to a visiting author when he probably should be speaking to a therapist or his parents about the fact that there was a spectral being living in the attic and he had to commit a murder.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
that
that's
is literally what
struck
happens
me.
in this book.
Like, literally at the end of the book, I was like, so he killed someone? Like, that's
He
the
does.
resolution, is like he murders someone.
So Pardon Tillinghast is a real person. You can actually go see where he is buried. However, the timeline does not actually line up. So one of the early colonial settlers of that area is a Pardon Willinghast, and there are many Willinghasts in the area. And there is a Pardon who does live to be 96 years old, but this is not his story.
Interesting.
I also love that he uses microfilm.
That was like a tender moment for me as like someone who's also enjoyed using microfilm in the past. And like, I do give him props for like diving in on the research process. He doesn't seem like put off by learning how to use microfilm.
I found myself kind of unexpectedly moved by the ending of this book, which is like, again, as a metaphor for kind of white America. Kenny's like, I actually don't even really understand or know what happened. And on the last page, he says, I fell asleep and woke here now. But in case you're like thinking that this is going to be like a quick transition to like him being literally woke, it is absolutely not. I keep thinking about Caleb, what happened to him. I only helped him get out of that room. And he says like he doesn't really understand what happened. That's why I go walking around a lot. There are so many old houses. I don't know how to find him. He's afraid he's still trapped. And the final line is this imagined Kenny asking Avi, do you think he's free yet? I mean, really free. And it's like, that's a great, like, if I imagine we did not have a deep conversation when I read this at my elementary school about what that line means, but that's actually a really smart way to end this book instead of a kind of white savior fixing this situation. We're left with this very, I think, unsettled feeling as readers that the actual liberation of Caleb is totally an open question.
Yeah, like it's not a finished product, and certainly
No.
not a product or project for which Kenny deserves any real credit. Like, I think something that's really great about this book is like the anger that Caleb is empowered to have, and like the absolute distrust of Kenny and like all white people, and the real anger that doesn't seem to be like like there's no push towards making like towards like the happy slave motif that's so dominated so many kind of like fictional depictions of American history for so many decades. So I think that was a really good pivot to kind of like force Kenny to sit with like totally warranted anger and frustration and distrust. And Kenny responds as you might expect, which is like, I don't want you to be mad at me, but also I don't want to put myself out there for you. But yeah. I mean, I think the ending is to suggest like a real conversation like you're suggesting you probably didn't have in class after you finish this book. And I'm wondering if like people did have those conversations after reading it in the time.
I don't know. I mean, it was very much assigned. It was very much like from what I was reading online today, there are curriculum packets. There are all different ways to kind of talk about this book. I do think part of what sticks out to me today as a reader is being from New England, as we've talked about before. I feel like I am continually surprised, even as a professional historian, by what I learn almost on a weekly basis about some other dimension of the cruelty of slavery in New England, or the extent to which people were kept in a state of unfreedom into the mid-19th century. Something that's underway in Rhode Island right now, to your earlier question about segregated communities within Providence. And Providence is absolutely a highly segregated city today. By the early 19th century, there were several communities that were really based on Black entrepreneurship, free Black people who had created their own businesses, usually because they were shut out of other opportunities in the city and really relegated, right, to creating their own. And both of those early communities, or I should say two of those early concentrations not far from where this book was set, were destroyed by mobs of white enraged people who claimed, very much like in this book, that people were causing trouble, right? Like there wasn't a threat of an insurrection among enslaved people, because by this time it's the 1820s, early 1830s, but they nonetheless came in. And I am not saying it is the same as the Tulsa massacre, but the scale proportionally was just about as devastating, just completely leveling portions of the community. And the way that people got away with it, white people got away with it, was by claiming that they were destroying houses of ill repute and banishing out people who were criminals. And essentially what Caleb is saying over and over to Kenny is like, you are questioning me because you don't want to unravel how your family got to live in this great house and how I got stuck being a haunted, enslaved person in it for 220 years. He's like, that's the part you don't want to talk about with me. So he's like, how about we put the keychain down and we stop asking questions of me and we start thinking about this? Because Kenny begins with a very romantic vision of Providence. He's like, there's so much history, there's so many old houses. And the ending, I think, is really a remarkable achievement, in part because every time Kenny passes by a house, he wonders what other ghosts or if Caleb is haunting that house. Like, he can't unsee it. And I think that's a really powerful stand-in for, once you know the full history of a place. I love this part of Providence, but if you can walk around it and not think about the slave trade, you have chosen to discard a lot of information.
And I think part of that work of like erasure and how people have curated the memory is house museums themselves as like as a way of delivering public history. Because they literally get to decide like who they're erasing former residents of these homes and like curating a narrative about who lived there and why it's important to remember them. So I think like it's important to kind of call that out too, that like Providence has that, so do so many New England cities, that, you know, like the history of house museums themselves are like really built on white supremacy.
Kenny's mom, when Kenny starts to kind of raise some questions, Kenny's mom kind of brushes him to the side and says like, well, that's probably where the servants lived. Like, you know, don't think any more about it. And I think making him a transplant from somewhere else makes Kenny especially curious about kind of the history that he's not aware of. And I think what is so kind of phenomenal in the telling of this story, again, the fact that like Kenny doesn't flinch when he hears that word. Maybe where he's from in Los Angeles, he heard that word all the time. When he is kind of having this conversation with his mother and when he has lots of discussions with his parents, they are fundamentally not curious about the world around them. And that's what sets Kenny apart. And it's also what makes this a very lonely summer for him. Like, bizarrely, he can kind of cope with the time travel, but he's like, I have a lot of time to fill. And like nobody gets what I'm after, which is why he's so quick to bond with Pardon Tillinghast, who's posing as, you know, like evil library worker when he's actually the ghost of a murderer. Like, this book has it all.
It does, and it's like a lot of like weird like contradictions or just like things coupled together that seem interesting in juxtaposition. Like, the parents to sell Kenny on the move across country are basically like, Kenny, look, like we're made to believe that these parents flew across country without Kenny, bought this house. He has never seen it before until move-in day. And then they bring him up to the attic and they're like, Kenny, what a privilege. You get to live in the attic. Like, this is just for you. And he's like, wow, okay, cool. Like, that's what sells him on this move. But then like to placate him, they're like, well, it's probably the servants' quarters. So it's like, you can kind of see like where he fits in the constellation of his own family, and that they've kind of like literally situated him in the same space as servant quarters, but they're selling it to him as luxury. So it's kind of like a story about gentrification too, but also like the politics of the family and of like the role of the child in the family. And you can also put as a compliment, it's funny that you're saying like they're trying to pretend like it's 21st century in your version, because I think the most telling detail that this is not 21st century is that this kid is roaming here, there, and everywhere. He's taking himself all over Providence. He's getting into stuff. He's having chemical tests performed on the like a sliver of wood for $10. I was like, oh my God, where are you going? Like, is this a Theranos test? But it's like the parents have no knowledge of him. Like, the surveillance of the parents of him does not exist. Like, there's clearly no cell phones. And you know how parents now are basically just like, okay, call me when you leave. Okay, then call me when you're halfway there. Please then call me when you get there. Call me while you're driving. I don't care. Like, my mom's like that. I'm not a parent, but it's like, I understand like peers of mine who are like that because it's how people are now. So it's just so funny to have the parents be like, I don't know, call us at some point if you want. Like, I don't know. Go to the swim club.
I wrote 3 headlines for my notes of this book. The first one, an inversion of Get Out. I won't be explaining that further. The second, America's Upstairs, race. Third note, $10 chemical analysis. Wow.
Yeah.
Like, he has a very helpful interaction with a pharmacist who's like, it is going to cost you. And he's like, how much is this going to set me back? And she's like, I will test this straight up creepy thing you brought in for $10.
They never ask a follow-up question. I love that they say to him in response when they hit him with the results and they're like, it's human blood. He's like, wow. And they're like, okay, it's over 100 years old, so we don't have to call the police. They were like, if this was not over 100 years old, we'd be calling the cops on you right now. And he was like, okay, wow, interesting, thanks. And you could just see Elizabeth Holmes like reading this from her future jail cell, being like, wow, a $10 drug test, like blood test, like somebody did figure it out in a drugstore. Wow.
What if she names her child Kenny?
I would love that. I mean, it would tell a story, you know?
I think it would.
Wow. Yeah, but I mean, he has like the ingenuity, but he doesn't really want to do anything with it either. Where he's like, oh, like, okay, I guess I'm going to figure out how to do a chemical blood test at a pharmacy. I guess I'm going to figure out microfilm and like track down all the previous owners of this house. I guess I'm going to look for a notice of Caleb's suicide. And then he like checks his facts when he wakes up after murdering the bad librarian, and he sees like actually he's been reported as committing like suicide in that locked room, so he realizes it worked. So it's like he has good instincts, but at the end of it you just have this feeling of like, and he will never be interested in history again.
No, there's a moment where he's talking with Willinghast, and I realize I may have been saying Tillinghast, and I apologize for that, but not really, because this man is like a time travel murderer. Kenny asks him in what I think is a pretty fascinating conversation, weren't there people who wanted to get rid of slavery? Willinghast straight up dodges the question and says, there are always those who desire to rush history. What do you mean? Oh, said Willinghast vaguely, agitators and the like. May I inquire as to why you are so interested? And Kenny explained something that remains true today, which is that it is very difficult to get past numbers and to actually get information on people who are enslaved or free living in this area in this time period. And he starts to have a conversation about that, and then he just says, okay, can you tell me about murders? And Willinghast is like, all right, now you have my attention. And then they start to talk about whether the murder of an enslaved people would be kept in a record. Willinghast shrugged. It was not considered important. And again, I think if you read this with like a greater knowledge of the period and kind of how sadly true that is, it's actually an incredibly profound scene. Like, it was not considered important. And I think there's a new Twitter account that instead of reposting adverts of runaways, they are repositioned and rewritten from the point of view of the fugitive. Right. So instead of just being a transcription, and I think that work was also incredibly important, instead of being the transcription of the runaway ad, it is a perspective of a self-liberated person saying like, I am this person. This is what I'm wearing. This is what I chose to do, to kind of put you in that moment of decision and crisis. And I think the candidness with which they're having this conversation of, he is also like literally a man from the past who's defending himself, but putting him in the role of a modern person working in an archive who's like, it's not important.
Yeah.
Like, it shows a direct line. Like, he's like comfortable saying in the 1980s setting, it's not important.
It made me think of our former grad student colleague, Aaliyah Henley's work, because a lot of her work has been on exploring the origins of historical societies in the US and kind of exploring like early collecting decisions where colonial ladies would be like, it's really important to preserve my mom's slippers, like her ballroom slippers, less important to preserve like formerly enslaved people's chains that may be in my possession for reasons I don't want to discuss.
Yeah, like what was considered ephemera and what was considered actually important to telling this story. We're hoping to do kind of more with this, but we have been really fortunate to be in touch with Cynthia Chin and some of her work. She's a person who wrote to us early on, but she takes a closer examination of Martha Washington's clothing and looks at it from the perspective as a piece of labor and art by enslaved people and kind of like flips the narrative on what you'd be thinking about it. And I think part of what you're seeing in this book is an ugly and kind of naked or like exposed truth about the way people actually thought, and I think in some archives still think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it kind of shows like a call for the kind of history that is so needed right now, which is not only the history of, you know, like Black history and people of color, but really to explore like what is the history of whiteness itself? Like what is this thing that's hiding in plain sight that has so like shaped the geography of our cities, like the displacement of wealth, like all of these things that define our national story in so many ways that people have wanted to really, that's the history that's been erased or like has been ignored because it implicates all of us and people don't want to sit with that.
When you are hearing this, it will still be October 2021. And in November 2021, you will hear me talking about the Star-Spangled Banner. And listen, we all contain multitudes.
Wow. Yes. Yes. I didn't realize how deep it goes with you, but you know,
this book, Star-Spangled Banner.
Lots happening. I'm
all over the place. Like, I do think there is something to walk away from this from, which is like, what is your something upstairs? And like, what is this country's something upstairs? The book Ghostland by Colin Dickey is like a fascinating exploration of the function of ghost stories at different historic sites and in different places. And you and I both love a ghost tour, and like more on that is forthcoming. But I think what we love about it is like, what is the story they're trying to tell through this ghost story?
Yeah. Like, what work does a ghost do for you that you can't do for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, where I work now, a lot of people use ghost stories as a way to talk about child labor in a way that's more comfortable for them.
Interesting.
Which I respect. I understand it.
That's interesting.
People do also say, like, pretty much on the reg, like, there's a child standing in here. And you have to be like, okay, so we are going to continue on.
Well, what if there is, though? That's a thing.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is.
I know we're, like, on the same page on that one, but it's like... That's the move historic sites aren't willing to make, is, like, to actually be like, but what if there is?
So I have no problem saying, but what if there is? And I also understand that my role is not to speak for anyone that worked in that mill or who has a connection to that mill, but to say, like, you've chosen to spend an hour out of your very busy life to think about this place, and I want to make a space for pretty much whatever those thoughts are, so long as they're not hate crimes. Which is actually harder than it sounds.
I believe that. I also think, too, like, the kind of culture you're raised in, like, helps to prepare you for whether or not you can accept ghost stories as being, like, based in something real. Like, whenever I think about them, I think about, like, growing up with my, like, extremely, like, old Irish relatives who would have these, like, family history stories about, like, you know, like a relative, like our great-great-grandfather was visited by a ghost in the night who told him not to go to work in the coal mine the next day, so he didn't, and then there was like a cave-in and he escaped it. And so it was like, wow, like, you know, what was that going on there? Or like dead relatives who come back as ghosts and are like, don't worry, I was fine, like after like dying in some kind of tragedy. It's like, what's happening?
I don't know what's happening. I know there is like something upstairs.
Okay, I respect that. I mean, maybe that's just where we land. Like, we need Avi to tell us.
We need Avi. I am open to reading a lot more Avi. Charlotte Doyle, love her hair. like, I am willing to go there at some point. We're just also like pretty deep in ship stuff, so just maybe not now. We'll do a ship lap of her later.
Wow. Interesting. That or Horatio Hornblower, who I thought was like hot when I was a teenager.
Never gonna happen.
Why?
No, I'll read Hort. I don't know.
No, it's like you need to watch the adaptations. That's where it is. They're all on YouTube. Know. If people, even if Allison's not into it, it's like, okay. It's something.
I do think like I'm very happy that like we spent last October in your hometown. We spent like this October in my home state. We're going to look at cultish language next. Will I be willing to apply that lens on my own fixation on my home state? I'm not sure. We'll find out.
Wow. You have to kind of prepare yourself for that.
I kind of doubt it.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, well, we're heading to the Vanderbilts next, and I don't feel like you're going to take that. Like, you're going to need to, like, apply that cultish lens, but, like, will you have adopted that in the month between that and Anderson? I don't know.
I literally was looking at the notes that I prepared and printed out for today, and I was like, I will be insufferable for this recording.
I think, like, you survived without being insufferable, but, like, your passion is coming through. Your love for Rhode Island is deep, and I respect that.
Thank you.
And, you know, I guess, like, we're just going to keep rolling with it because the Vanderbilts will certainly bring us back there.
Oh, my God. We have to call it, like, Vanderbilt pump rules. We'll see. We'll see. We have to get there.
Ooh, yeah.
Let us know your suggestions. I love when you have suggestions. I love when people put things out there for us to do. I also have been thinking, if you have other creative ideas for things for us to do together that aren't watching a film, let us know, right? Like if there are other ways that we can engage. And I just want to say thank you, especially to the international listeners who like make Herculean efforts to engage in stuff that is completely not on the right time zone for them. It's very cool that you still kind of check in with the community and are part of the different groups.
Yeah, and seeing all the meetup groups that are so active, it's really encouraging, and you know, hopefully we'll get to like join up at some point. Mm-hmm. And be great to go on tour someday, like maybe someday when we feel safe enough, we'll do it. But you know, we just appreciate all of you and what feels like the last great safe place on the internet, our Discord community.
Yes, I agree.
So we do appreciate all of you. We're looking forward to what comes next. And, you know, maybe we could even have, like, some listeners, like, on the Discord do some crafting demos. Like, I don't know. Like, we're open to whatever. And also the watch-along channel that's there, like, please feel free to use that to stage your own watch-alongs. Like, they don't have to just be with Allison and I. Like, what's really cool is that you guys have all these conversations, like, without us, and it's not about us. And that's, like, really cool to see and be a part of.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much, everyone. We will see you next month, and thanks so much for listening.
Happy Halloween.